Good morning or good afternoon. My name is David Beas. I am a life marketing consultant with Cavalier Associates, and I appreciate all of you for joining us today. If you're not aware, Cavalier is an insurance general agency. We facilitate business on the life, long-term care, disability, and annuity. And although we do the typical things that you'd expect from a general agency as far as running quotes, concept design, underwriting, and ultimately assisting you in placing business, our real focus is growing relationships with advisors and providing them the resources and knowledge necessary, not just to maintain their current practice, but to actually help you build it. We do this through a number of in-person and online events. And if you're in the Southern California region, we'd love to have you out at one of our upcoming events. And Shawn's actually going to be flying out here to join us for that. But for everybody else, this is part of our online platform. And joining me today is Shawn Britt. She is an advanced planner in the care planning side. I would actually put her as probably the top long-term care planner in the country. And she is with Nationwide Financial. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, Shawn, before we jump right into things, maybe give everybody a quick, call it 30-second just background on who you are and your kind of journey through the long-term care space.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time. I've worked for Nationwide is it's only the second insurance company I've ever worked for, and I've been there. This year is 25 years. And I have my interest in long-term care is due to a lot of things, but I would say one of the foundations of that is being the youngest granddaughter of a large family, with cousins old enough to be my parents. In fact, more were old enough to be my parents than weren't. So I've seen a lot in my young days of people needing care, the family pitching in, what it did to the family. And I kind of knew once I got in the insurance business, this was the direction I wanted to go. I felt that I had a lot of life experience that could be helpful, and that's the direction I took. So I do it a little differently than most people. I also I have a dotted line to product development, so I help develop our products. I want to make sure that they're taking care of unique needs. I also want to make sure that people are incented to buy these. So one of the things we've done is made our product tax deductible. And then, of course, I'm housed in the advanced sales department, so I do advanced planning with long-term care. And it's surprising what directions you can take with that people aren't aware of. So that's part of my job too, is to make people aware that long-term care is not just coverage is not just for the middle class. There's some unique advanced planning things we can do with it as well.
I appreciate you diving into your background there and obviously what fuels you each and every day. And I think you are definitely in a unique position. I work with a lot of advanced markets or advanced planning attorneys at various insurance companies. You are the only one that I know has a direct influence on product development and obviously the features associated with those products, one of those things being the tax deductible nature of them. So very important for everybody. If you have feedback for Shawn come the end of this, please put that in the chat. We're going to have a short Q&A session at the end, and I want to make sure that we answer those questions. And this is really your opportunity to go to somebody who builds product and say, hey, I like this, I don't like that. So feel free to either enter that in the chat or reach out to us later, and we can help facilitate those conversations with Shawn. And Shawn, the second piece of that, as you talked about, is being in the advanced planning arena as it relates to care planning. I would say the majority of advisors, insurance agents, and even their clients kind of fall into one of two pockets, if you will, that they've self-imposed, right? And those are the ones who I need to have the insurance because my portfolio is at risk from a long-term care, whether or not they know that it is at risk from a long-term care event. And the other side that says, well, I think I can self-insure. And that second bucket or that second box is really the ones that we're going to focus on today. And so to kind of give an agenda for today, we are going to focus on high net worth, ultra high net worth, so call it the affluent to mass affluent client, or really if you have a client that says, I can self-insure, this conversation today is the conversation for you. The other part of this conversation is actually going to go down the road of what really 50% of individuals you'll run into in this country experience, which is a second marriage, a divorce, cohabitation, some type of unique living arrangement that we as planners or as advisors may be a little hesitant to step into. So, Shawn, I want to kick it off with this question right here, and this is the big one: is why do traditional long-term care strategies, conversation pieces, why do they fail to address the unique needs of the affluent, mass affluent, self-insuring client?
I kind of open this with a lot of times the advisor will bring it up and the client will immediately say, I can self-insure. And then the conversation ends because the client is thinking of traditional long-term care insurance. They don't necessarily realize that there's long-term care coverage attached to financial products that can do way more for them than they ever imagined. And a lot of times the advisor doesn't know what to say next. He may not realize there's advanced planning concepts that are available. I've also seen the reverse where the client comes in and says, I'm thinking maybe we need to have long-term care coverage. And the advisor will go, why? You can self-fund. Because he doesn't realize the advantages. So that's the first thing we want to do is get both of those things to stop happening because there's so much planning you can do for your high net worth client or your affluent client with long-term care coverage. So we've got to educate them on the fact that there are products out there that are so different from our grandmother's long-term care policy and that we can do all sorts of things with it. For example, we could put I want to be respectful. Am I supposed to stay generic? I didn't ask you ahead of time, or can I use my own product?
Use your own product.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so for example, for this answer, it kind of helps. We can put a Care Matters policy, which is our hybrid cash indemnity long-term care coverage. We can put that in an ILET, and you're thinking, why would you do that? Well, one of the things you would want to say to such a client is, I've discovered a weak link in your estate plan. And they're like, wait a minute, I thought we had that all straightened around. And you go, well, so did I. But I've been learning a lot more about long-term care. And I realized you plan to self-fund. We kind of discussed that before. We could agree you could afford to. And yes, you can. However, that also creates the chance you could pay unnecessary estate tax because you're going to leave it in your estate to self-fund. What I want to do is get some of that money out of your estate. So what we're going to do is take a little chunk of money, buy this Care Matters product, which is a cash product. It's like your own cash, almost like self-funding because you can do whatever you need to do with it. But we're going to put it in your ILET. And I'm not going to go through the whole process in this thing, but basically there's a process of how you get it out without ruining the trust. And it makes money for the trust. So now not only are you not subjecting yourself to the unnecessary estate tax, you have the possibility of making extra money for the trust to leave to your beneficiaries. How does that sound? And they're like, okay. I mean, anything when you say the words make more money, they are happy. And of course, you need to use an indemnity product to do this. And of course, we're a cash indemnity product, so it works very well. And then what the attorney can do is take more of the money in their estate that was being held for long-term care and maybe find another way to shelter that as well from estate taxes. Now we've tightened up the estate plan. So remember, your opening conversation is you don't want to say, let's talk about long-term care. You want to say, I discovered a weak link in your estate plan because they want to know what it is.
Hey, Shawn, I appreciate you put that carrot right in the front for everybody. So, to kind of quickly recap in case you missed that because you were coming in a little slow to the meeting there is the ability to set up long-term care policies inside an irrevocable life insurance trust that not only secures the assets within that trust, but actually makes money for the client. And I think that's a big deal. And it's interesting. It reminds me of a story. You brought up, the self-insuring story. I can do that. I can do this. And I was actually with an advisor just a week and a half ago. And Shawn, I know you and I had discussed this story, but it was the advisor's actually buying some life insurance for themselves. And he says to me, well, hopefully I won't need this too long because I'll grow my business to a point where I won't need insurance. My spouse, my wife can just live off of that. And I said to him, I said, well, what is your business worth now? What do you think it's worth, right? At that time, whatever that magical number might be. I said, but let's rewind and look back a little bit. What was your business worth in April of 2020 versus what was your business worth in April of 2021? The difference in that is astronomical. So whether it's long-term care, life insurance, or whatever structure we might be using, or a combination of those structures, the insurance provides security and liquidity for the asset that you're growing. That might be a business, that might be a stock portfolio, that might encompass the estate as a whole. So I appreciate you putting that forward, and we can definitely, if anybody's interested in that structure, it is one that's a little bit convoluted as far as the flow chart goes, but it is very, very interesting and a very, very good idea when you're dealing with somebody who has an ILIT set up, has an estate tax issue, or may have an estate tax issue, or really just want to protect their asset in the most efficient way possible. So Shawn, as I move forward here,
Oh, can I just add? I do have white papers on that I think you have copies of. I can get you the most recent ones. If anyone's interested in learning more and reading about it, we can send them the white papers.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can get that out to everybody. And so I know we talked about self-insuring and the advisor or the agent, kind of whether it's the client that says, no, I can self-insure, or it's the advisor saying, no, I can self-insure. Either way, you're arriving at the same piece. And as you explained, there's different techniques and topics and structures that we can work through that. Are there any other common mistakes that advisors make when they have a client who says they can self-insure, or they themselves are thinking the client can self-insure?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple things. I wanted to kind of play off your story a minute ago, but before, one of the things, advice the client says I can self-insure. Great. Now, most advisors have the same thing happening with their wealthy clients. When do they hear from the wealthy client? When the market's down. They don't hear from them when the market's up. They hear from them that's when they're calling. What happened? Why is my portfolio balance? Why has it gone down so much? So on and so on. Just remind them of that. So, Mr. Smith, when do we hear from you? Don't the market's down. So yes, you can afford to self-insure, and that sounds good now because nothing's happening to your portfolio. What I want to do is insure your portfolio against the market going down. We put a little money aside, immediately leverage it. You can't leverage your own money. Self-insuring is impossible. The definition of insurance, at least one of them, is the immediate leverage of $1 done by an insurance company. You can't do that with your own money. So what I want to do is take a little bit of your money. We're going to immediately leverage into this nice big pool of money off to the side, not tied to the market, ready to go, insuring your portfolio against having to touch it if a long-term care event occurs. Because trust me, if you self-fund this, what's going to happen is if you need it when the market is down, not only does that money never grow back, it doesn't grow forward. It's a double loss. I don't think you're interested in double. You're not interested in a single loss, let alone a double loss. So let's insure your portfolio. Now, notice what I did. I didn't talk about insuring him because he doesn't want to hear about insuring him. But when you say, let's insure the portfolio, oh, well, how do we do that? Well, we buy you this policy, and that's how we're going to, so you kind of want to take the person out of it, kind of put the person off to the side a little bit, focus on the portfolio. We're insuring the portfolio. And then you can even go further, if they're still pushing back a little bit, then say, okay, let me put it to you this way. You want to self-insure. I want you to self-assure. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's keep the numbers real easy here so we can do them in our head. But you're going to take $100,000 and put it in a fairly safe investment so you can't lose money. And that sounds good. And it'll grow slowly, and that's fine. And when you need long-term care, you'll go get that money. The problem, and it's cash and you can use it however you want. But the problem is when you run out of money, what's going to happen? We're back to the original problem. We're going to your portfolio, maybe in an inopportune time. So what I want to do is create a stop loss situation for you. Now notice I use the term stop loss. Clients love that term. If stop loss means I can't lose too much, what we're going to do is take that same $100,000, put it into this cash indemnity care matters policy, immediately leverage it into this nice pot of money off to the side, not tied to the market. And if you need a long-term care event, you're going to go get that money. Now, the first $100,000 they pay you is your money. That's great. But now you have a stop loss because the next $450,000 is coming from the insurance company, not your portfolio. And that's why you pay me. You pay me to make sure that I am preserving and growing your portfolio. And this is how we do it.
Well, I think those are really good terminologies to use. And one of the things that I like to do, one of the structures that I focus on actually in having these conversations is these clients are often focused, to your point, on the growth of the money, right? And so asking them to say, hey, take that money and buy some insurance with it. Well, that's not just the cost of insurance, but it's also the opportunity loss on the money. You can start to have that conversation in a different way, to your point, to the self-assured, to using a term like a stop loss on it. The other piece that I would add into that is actually focusing on the internal rate of return of the total long-term care pool. Because what I'm saying is, hey, reallocate $100,000 that you would otherwise invest conservatively, move that into a different platform or a different chassis. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, when you're 83 years old, that $100,000 is now worth $450,000. And the return on that is north of 7.5% tax-free. Depending on what state you're in, I'm in California, you're in Ohio, if you're in Arizona or Florida, it might be a little bit different. If you're in New York, California, it's astronomical. But that might be a 10%, 9.5% return for some folks. And now you're speaking an investment-based language, which is going to be far more common for the advisor who's already handling those investments, or if you're the agent who's part of that advisory team that's relating the terminology linguistically to the conversation. So you get to walk through that. So Shawn, I appreciate you diving into that structure, and I think having that combination of the right terminology and then focusing on the right aspects of the plan make a lot more sense than the general conversation of, well, how are you going to afford $7,000 a month? That's not really the concern here. We know you can do that. How do we leverage that best? So I'm going to transition gears a little bit here, because when you're dealing with high net worth clientele, you have a number of different pieces, and often those pieces involve legal counsel. But before we jump right into the legal counsel piece, and this is naturally going to bleed into the legal counsel, what are some of the financial and emotional implications of care planning as it relates to divorce, multiple marriages, prenuptials, etc.?
Can I pick up one more case study before we talk about that? Because we may not get back to it, and I think it's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am actually working on a case right now where the woman is worth $70 million. And the reason she wants long-term care is they're now spending $30,000 a month on care for her father. Wealthy people generally don't go to facilities. They stay home for 24/7 care. That adds, I mean, if you live in California or New York, that care is running $30,000, $35,000 a month, not a year, a month. And it doesn't take long for that to add up to $1 million. Now, even if you're worth $70 million, $1 million sounds like a lot of money. That's $1 million they're not leaving to charity. It's $1 million that's not going to put their name on the wall or a wing of some type of hospital or organization that they would have normally contributed to. When you remind them that they have not just family to leave money to, but organizations and causes. And that's $1 million that will not be given to those people. It makes them think again. This is exactly what happened with her. She realized this is $1 million my father's not leaving to people. And I don't want that to happen in my life. So it's always about what is the pain point. And for high net worth and high really high net worth people, it's not about not having enough money to survive on. It's other pain points such as legacy planning and charitable planning. So remind them they're probably, even these luxury, they have in the big cities, they have these luxury assisted living facilities. They're running 35,000 plus a month. So even if they do choose not to stay at home, it's still going to cost them $1 million real quickly. So I just wanted to add that before we moved forward.
No, I appreciate you jumping into that. That's a great story. I mean, it's an unfortunate story, but it is a story that relates. And yeah, it goes back to these individuals, these families are not looking at $7,000 a month. They're looking at $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a month in actual care. So, but moving on from that one is, what are the financial or emotional implications of LTC planning in cases of divorce or multiple marriages?
This is where it gets really interesting. We see a lot of horror stories with claims and things with these type of situations because, I mean, as I say, you can't look at a client and say, oh, in case you get divorced, let's do this. I mean, you can't say that. But you can kind of get a feeling like if your client has already been divorced twice and is on the third wife, chances are there may be another divorce in the picture. So you want to keep that in mind. Or even if it's a second marriage for both and you think, hey, they look like a nice couple, you still have to consider this. Like ask a question like, and you're their advisor, so it's not a none of your business question. It's a question you need to know. In planning this long-term care, these policies, how we have them owned and such, I kind of want to know did you guys bring separate assets into the marriage? Do you keep them separate? You might already know that if you've been their advisor for a while. If they're a new client for you, you're going to have to ask, how do you handle your assets? Is it a yours, mine, and an ours account? How are you doing this? How are you going to pay for these policies? Now, that's really important because I'll give you two examples. If he's the one with all the money and she's the one with the looks and the nice personality because his first wife wasn't very nice, so he traded her for a nice one. He's paying for everything. He probably should own them both because he wants to control the beneficiary designations. On the other hand, if both of them are contributing to the payments, they should each own their own policy. Now, is that going to avert everything that could go wrong? No. But you want to try to look at what's happening within the situation. I've seen cases. I saw a case once where she was the sugar mama, so to speak. She paid for both policies, but the advisor had the husband own his own policy. There was a big problem with that. He needed long-term. She was actually younger. Not by a lot, but he was younger. He ended up with early onset dementia. Somehow his daughters found out that she had taken over power of attorney and somehow got him to a lawyer, got him to change it back to them. And when it came time to file a claim, he had, of course, early onset Alzheimer's. He couldn't sign paperwork and they refused to do it. They just said to her, you're his wife. You're responsible for him. He meant for us to get the death benefit on that policy. And there was nothing she could do about it, simply because the advisor put his name on there as owner, even though she was paying for everything.
Use a good line. First marriages are joint assets. Second marriages are often separate.
Right. And they were with my husband and I. So my late husband and I got married. We brought our own money in. And with time, we had joint stuff too. But another story I tell is how my own husband, who was a financial advisor, I have 3 long-term care policies. He had 0. I kept saying, honey, you need to buy a policy. He's like, I don't need a policy. Why is that? I'm married to you. Have to do with anything. He goes, well, you're like this big long-term care expert, and you help take care of your grandma, and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? What would you do if your client said that to you? He goes, well, that's different. They're not married to you. And I would just like shake my head, and it happened like 5 times. Finally, one day I'm writing a white paper or something. The light bulb went off. I was talking to him more like a wife. So I went home that day and I said, I need to talk to you. Well, we never bickered. So he thought, oh boy, I'm really in trouble. So I just said to him, you are putting me in the position of explaining to your children why I'm spending their inheritance on your care. Because guess what? I'm not spending my kids' inheritance on your care. So you need to do something about it. I just walked out of the room, went upstairs, didn't come down for several hours. And so a few months later, I get this call at work. And he said, I have a surprise when you get home. So he could never contain himself. He could never just truly surprise me. He had to tell me there was a surprise. So I walk into the house looking for the flowers on the kitchen table. There was no flowers. I'm like, ooh, might be a gift card to Macy's or White House Black Market or somewhere fun to shop, and no envelope. So he comes in and he's got this envelope, but it's way too big to hold a gift card. So I'm like, wonder what this is. I open it up. It was his long-term care insurance. And I literally cried and said, this is the best gift you ever gave me.
If you've taken care of somebody once, you don't want to do it again. And
Exactly.
I mean,
That's
like,
what he didn't
your,
understand.
your grandmother, you can do it again. It's like, no, I did that once. I don't want to do it again. It's not only an emotional burden, but if you're not insured, it becomes an economic burden. But it's a good point and Shawn, you're very, very good at this. You're a very good storyteller. So I think this comes naturally to you, but it doesn't for everybody. How can how can an advisor tactfully approach, sensitive family issues like disputes over caregiving responsibilities or unequal financial contribution?
Speaking of, it's funny, somebody just called me earlier today and asked me about the financial contributions. And I told them the same story I told you a few days ago. I had some friends that came to me. They were 3 brothers. They had to put their mom in a nursing home, and she didn't have a policy. And they were like, we're arguing over who pays for what. And we thought you could help because this is what you do. Like I said, well, it's the way it worked is they all had, none of them were of lower income. We had an upper middle class, and affluent, and a super wealthy. So I just said, we're going to means test it. That's it. It's that simple. Means test it. You guys are close. You all know what each other has. I know none of you have secrets from each other. Means test it. That's it. Easy. And they're like, oh, we should have thought of that. So it worked out real well for them. And that's what they did. And they were all very happy with that arrangement. One paid 20%, one paid, I think it was 30%. The really wealthy guy paid for half of it. And they were happy with that. One of the things as an advisor, you don't want to get too involved in it, because you know what happens when the outsider gets involved and everybody's mad, they end up mad at the outsider. So you don't want to be the outsider. You might, if you know of someone who does mediation, you might recommend a mediator to them. You can recommend a few things like my recommendation of means testing, but you don't want to get personally involved with the actual talking to the relatives. And that's one of the things insurance does for you, is it keeps some of those discussions from ever happening. If you have to get a family caregiver involved, it's usually the daughter or the daughter-in-law. So I helped take care of my grandmother. Guess who else took care of her? My mother. My mother was not the daughter. She was the daughter-in-law. Now, my mother adored my grandmother, and it was okay. But the point is, my grandmother actually had daughters.
Mm-hmm.
but it was my mother who took care of her and me.
Yeah.
So,
I won't get into the awkward, she comes home from taking care of your mom. Now you're sitting at the dinner table and she is tired and stressed, and you're like, hey, how'd it go today? That's not always equal nor a fun conversation. Personal
oh,
experience.
and the other thing that happens is the child, which is usually a son, sorry guys, who lives on the other side of the country. So for you guys, it's the son who lives in New York, is the one with the most opinions on how mom should be taken care of. He's not helping, but boy, does he have opinions. I hear that all the time. And that just, if you talk about stressing the daughter out who's doing the care, she has enough stress without having to deal with her brother who doesn't approve of what she's doing or thinks she could do, well, just do this and you'll feel better and you won't be so tired. He doesn't know what's going on. So insurance helps keep that stuff from happening to families. It's just so important.
If this was a radio show, I would be hitting the can I get an amen button right now. Because I think that's a story that everybody would relate to. But Shawn, this is so important. You talk about as the advisor providing this, hey, it's means testing, maybe there's a route, there's a path, but also kind of keep your distance in a way and don't paint yourself as the evildoer or the bad person or the one that everybody gets mad at, right? These clients, these families, the mass affluent and affluent client, they have legal counsel. So why is it so important? You've just given a story, but what are the reasons is it so important for the advisor or the agent to engage legal counsel in setting up care planning structures for their clients?
One of the big reasons, working for an insurance company, and my fingers touch everything at our company. So one of the things you find is the advisor will sell the client a policy and never ask, do you have documents or your powers of attorney in order? I mean, that's one of the big recommendations. You sell them the policy, they sign the delivery receipt, and then you say, now you need to see an attorney if you do not have powers of attorney. And you need both financial and health care powers of attorney in place in case you end up with a cognitive impairment, unable to sign the claims paperwork. You've got to have someone who has the ability to sign for you, who can represent you. If you try to file a claim and there's nobody who can sign, it becomes a nightmare. And you do not want, and then your client, again, the family is mad at you. They're not going to give you their money when your dad dies because they see you as botching up his long-term care event. So you want to be able to at least say, hey, I told him to go to the lawyer. I even gave him 3 names of people I use. He didn't do it. I can't force him. So you at least want to make sure you've covered yourself, that you did what you should do. Of course, if you're not, now occasionally, I don't know, in California, do they allow attorneys to be financial advisors?
Not. They
In
typically
Ohio, they do.
they
So,
typically stay in their own lane. So
okay, well,
yeah.
and some states don't allow it. Ohio does. So my very first job in the industry, I worked for an attorney who was a financial advisor, which was a huge background for me, obviously. So that was easy. We always had the paperwork in order when we sold long-term care. But because it was like a one-stop shop for us. But, for the typical advisor, that's not the case. So you want to make sure, ask them if they have it, how old are they? They may have one, but it needs updated. A lot of time, and you want to readdress your plan, ideally once a year, but at least every couple of years. For example, you may have a divorce in the family, and the sweet daughter-in-law was supposed to be the one helping take care of mom or grandma. I actually was in that position too. I never even called her my granddaughter, my grandma-in-law, because she was my third grandma, and that's how she felt about me. And I helped take care of her. But while this was going on, I got a divorce from her grandson. Didn't matter. I loved her. She loved me. I still did what I always did for her. That's unusual. That doesn't usually happen. So you have this plan laid out, and daughter-in-law is going to help do whatever it was. And now 5 years down the road, the couple splits up. Who's going to do what granddaughter-in-law was going to do? So you need to always watch your plan. Who's, maybe the granddaughter, whatever, something has changed. The POAs might not be valid anymore. The side support the couple had planned on isn't around anymore. You always need to have a kind of a relook at your plan every year or two to make sure everything is in order.
And Shawn, advisors are always looking for additional, kind of ways to connect with attorneys or tax strategists. They're always looking for a new COI, right, to essentially build that relationship and start having those client engagement conversations. Care planning is a real way that not only differentiates the advisor for their clients, but actually differentiates them when they're going out and meeting with new attorneys, meeting with new CPAs or tax strategists. And then one of our attendees did say they actually have an attorney or know an attorney that is also an insurance advisor or an insurance licensed agent. So there is the opportunity for joint work there. That's at least in California. Again, most of the time we see everybody stay within their own silos. They'd rather not complicate that, I think, from a compliance standpoint, but it is something that's possible. So I do really want to stress, and even I'm actually speaking at an estate planning council meeting tomorrow night to a large group of advisors and CPAs, and a big part of my conversation is in the care planning space, and that's the differentiator. If I go up there and just talk about insurance or just talk about investments, that's not really anything unique. A lot of other people do that, but if I get in there and talk about long-term care planning for high net worth or ultra high net worth individuals, all of a sudden I become somebody different. So I think that's a really, really important tool, and one that every advisor, every insurance licensed agent can go out and utilize. So that said, we've talked about some of the differentiators here and kind of how you can move through care planning, but what other tools or resources exist, whether externally or through Nationwide? So I'll give you a chance to give a little bit of a commercial here. And I love staying away from commercials. But what are some of the tools and resources that advisors often overlook that can, really help them improve their care planning strategies?
So I'm going to give you a commercial because the first thing you want to do is go right to your BGA because, David understands this topic. He works with it. He understands it. He can really help send you in the right direction. And then you've got the insurance company who have tools to help. Like, for example, we have a long-term care cost of care calculator. It's on my cell phone. I just, on the phone. You can put it on your iPad, your computer. Once it's loaded with the one-time only code, you're good to go. Now, one thing I tell people, do not see the number on there and tell your client that's how much insurance you need. That's your starting point. And then depending on what your situation is, like if you're working with a middle class family, that might be your starting point. And then you look at, okay, what income would you have if you were no longer at home? Because middle class people stay at home until the cost of staying at home costs more than assisted living. That's generally what happens. So you kind of you have that. That's where the calculator helps you. You kind of know where the tipping point is. That's what you're using it for. You're not necessarily using for how much insurance we need to buy. Where's their tipping point? Now you can kind of figure out how much shortage they have. What's the shortfall? That's what we insure for. So you can use tools like that. The high net worth may want, honestly, the tool, I'll tell you this right now, I wouldn't necessarily use it for the highest of the high net worth because the tool is giving you national averages. Mm-hmm. So it's good it'll give you highs and lows. It's good for the middle class, the upper middle class. But once you get to the really high net worth or a very high affluent who are almost in estate tax categories, that's probably going to be too low of a number. But it can still be very helpful. So, that's just an example of tools. that insurance companies can provide. We also have a healthcare assessment that can be done if someone wants a little deeper dive on potential for long-term care needing it, and other things such as the cost of healthcare in general. So your insurance companies have a lot of tools, but I would start with David. He knows what he's doing. I've known him long enough to know what he's doing. You start with him, he knows who has what. He'll direct you to the things you need.
I
I see
appreciate.
it. Go ahead and answer. You see that chat there? You want to answer that question?
I will. I'll answer that one towards the end here. So,
Okay.
but yeah, it is, rule of thumb for using the tool as you get into the high net worth or ultra high net worth arena. Take that average tool and then double it. So
At least.
7,000 becomes 14,000. Memory care at 12,000 becomes 24,000. Also look towards, a more costly living assessment. And then, really go out and do some research for your clients. You look at what type of watches they own, what type of cars they drive, what type of house they live in. And not all high net worth fall into one category, right? I mean, some of the wealthiest people in the world, like Warren Buffett's house just looks like a normal house in Omaha, Nebraska. It's wild, right? But so understand their lifestyle and then start doing the research on actually going down that road of what care costs in that area. And if it is the maximum care, what does that actually look like? What's entailed in that? Who provides it, right? If you want government healthcare, you pay and you get government healthcare. If you want private, real nice, crystal glass healthcare, that's the other way to do it. And then you mentioned tipping point. The other way I like to look at it, it's an iceberg rolling over, right? So if you've ever seen an iceberg roll over, you know the wave that's attached to that, and the fear that is a consequence of it. So, look, Shawn, one of the things I like to do, one of the questions I get asked often in the insurance industry, whether it's related to life insurance, underwriting, or long-term care, is how is as we come to the end here, in a quick kind of 30-second way, what changes should advisors anticipate? How is the industry evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
First of all, group coverage it seems to be coming back. We are seeing a little more group coverage being offered. There's also I think you're going to see more long-term care writers on annuities. That's going to be a growing business, and that can be very useful for 1035 exchange situations. I think you're going to see other, with all the state legislation going on, with long-term care bills that, are going to essentially states trying to impose a payroll tax similar to what happened in Washington. Some of these, now California is probably on hold now on their bill because of the fires, and they've got a lot of frankly, more important things to do right now. Get Los Angeles rebuilt and that type of thing. But California had a few more options than most states do. Most states' bills they barely cover the problem. And we don't want your clients to think, oh, the state has me covered. So you want to make sure they understand what the real cost of care is. And even if they have access to a state benefit, they're still going to need supplemental coverage. So I think you may see more companies coming out with policies that kind of align with state bills. If this snow, a lot of states, quite frankly, are waiting to see what California does. Nobody likes what Washington did. California took what I call it, a much more responsible approach, and they haven't finished the job primarily because of the fires and a few other things. But a lot of states are kind of waiting to see what California does. So it's kind of a wait and see but I would see products definitely aligning with state LTC programs if that snowball effect actually happens.
Yeah, us out here in California got a lot of different issues that are, I think, way up higher on the priority list, whether it's moving water and making sure that works, or governor's facing another recall. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's coming down the pipeline here that is going to shift that long-term care piece away. But look, we're planners, and we don't plan for the next 4 years. We plan for the next 40. And that is the mindset that we need to have when we're thinking about long-term care. You can't buy insurance when you're on long-term care. You need to buy it way ahead of time, right? You need to make that investment ahead of time. So that's a good piece there. Now's a really good time. If anybody has any additional questions, go ahead and enter that in the chat. I'm going to ask Shawn, one more last question here. So if you have any questions, enter those now. We'll be able to get to them right after Shawn finishes her final comment here that I'll ask her about. And then also make sure that you join us online at CavalierAssociates.com. We have a host of additional events coming up in the near future, as well as in-person events. If you are in the Southern California region, Shawn is actually going to be down here on the 25th in Irvine at Water Girls. So come for the steak, leave with some knowledge. And then in the 26th, the very next day, we'll be in Pasadena at Celestino. So Shawn, parting question is there anything else you wanted to mention before we leave for the day?
There wasn't. It's like I'm talking. I guess the thing is with high net worth clients, don't be afraid to talk to them. A lot of advisors are afraid to even bring it up because they just assume that the client will not want to do it, that they're going to say, oh, I can self-insure. I've given you enough today, I hope, to get a conversation rolling. Just if they say that, remind them. Yeah, and where do you want to receive? Ask them, where do you want to receive care? You're going to self-fund. Where do you want to receive care? Oh, well, I'm not leaving the house. I mean, I hear men all the time say, I'm not leaving my house except in a pine box. So I'm like, well, until you end up in the pine box, we've got to figure out how much this is going to cost. Let's just talk about that. In other words, you haven't said, let's not self-fund. You've just said, we better figure out how much this is going to cost. And David had a good point earlier when he said, look at their watch, look at their car, look at their house. Do you think they want to change how they live when they're in long-term care? No. If they have to go to a facility, they're going to want a facility that's as high class as their house, their car, and their watch. They're going to want one that has a dog walker, that has hot stone massage therapy, that has all of these, 6 different restaurants that you can wheel yourself to. I mean, we're not talking about the typical facility that you see for the average person. So just walk them through. Just start with okay, you want to self-fund. Let's figure. I want to know how much we think we're going to spend. I got to work that out. This is what I do for you. Once you start getting those big numbers in their head, there is another way to do this. So don't be afraid. David and I hope gave you enough today to get a conversation started and continued with your high net worth and affluent clients.
And I did have a question. This is a good one. You've brought up indemnity policies a lot. So if people don't know, a reimbursement policy pays the care provider directly. Those are qualified care services only. And the question came to me as far as with the MAHA movement, is there newer wellness focused therapies, more holistic focused therapies? Are those going to be covered under long-term care? And this is the benefit of having an indemnity policy. It's one of the reasons your client might consider indemnity policies is. And this again goes back to the house, the watch, the lifestyle. Are they holistic? Are they more general, practitioner, physician type, right? Those are two different care solutions there. And if they are that piece, that's where an indemnity policy, one that as long as the client is technically long-term care qualified, 2 of 6 ADLs, that right there is going to allow them to use those funds as they see fit as well. There will be a replay coming up, a recording. That was another question I just got asked. So we will be producing a recording. Give me about a week on that one, and we'll get that out to you. And then, this is a good question here, Shawn.
Okay.
What is the minimum net worth you could consider that are relevant for these conversations? And I want to bring up one of the stories you told really early on. You have a client worth $70 million who is in the market for long-term care because her father is spending $30,000 a month on long-term care services. There is no cap, there is no ceiling to having long-term care conversations. For these individuals, if the return makes sense If the investment is the right amount of leverage, then they are interested in having that conversation.
The only difference is the conversation you have, not who needs it. Everybody needs it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody needs it. I split people into 3 tiers of wealth. You got the middle class. That's one. We don't want to run out of money. I don't want to end up with my wife, having nothing to live on because I spent it all on long-term care. That's the middle class. Then you have the affluent, and I gave you that story. They don't have estate tax issues, and even today you can be worth a lot and still not have estate tax issues. So you can either use you're going to spend $1 million quickly, or use the why self-insure when you can self-assure with the stop loss. You can go through that. And of course, the high net worth, you have a weak link in your estate plan. 3 different conversations, but they all need long-term care coverage. It's just for different reasons. There is no there is no cap. I did want to add one thing to the MAHA question. One of our mottos at Nationwide is our policy covers care services available today and in the future. Meaning you don't have to worry about what our policy covers. It covers it all, whether it exists today or not, whether it's alternative care services or not, we cover it all. That's where cash indemnity. And I'll tell you, high net worth clients, a lot of very high net worth people like to be in control. They don't want the traditional care services. They might want a lot of these outside of the box alternatives. That's another reason why cash indemnity becomes a very important, and sometimes the thing that'll get you over the line with them. Well, I can show you a policy that's going to pay you cash. Cash? Really? I mean, we don't have to do all those things and only pay for a list. No, it's cash. You pay for what you need, what you want. That'll get them over the line.
And Shawn, one of our attendees, also said, this is a good point to bring up. We didn't even think about this. And this is actually a more pressing issue that I see over the long-term care legislation part is, clients under 11 million in the state of Pennsylvania, they have an estate tax that could be as high as 15%, depending on the relationship of the heirs to the decedent. So that's a really, really, and Jeff, I appreciate you for messaging us on that. That is a conversation that we're actively having, not just from a care planning standpoint, but really from an estate planning standpoint, is you will see specific states, lean certain ways that are starting to look at state-based death taxes. Oregon has it. New Jersey used to have a pretty aggressive one. They may be bringing that one back. We'll see what happens. Definitely California. We're first to do everything. Like, we love taxing people here. We hate paying it, but go figure. So no, I really, really appreciate that comment. That is a really, really big piece to the total planning process, not just care planning, but total estate planning altogether. So Shawn, we're right up on an hour here. So I really, really appreciate your time. You are amazing as always. To the people that have attended, I thank you so much. And really, it is a special thing to hear from Shawn. I do hold her in the highest regards from a care planning standpoint, and just as a personal friend, she's a wonderfully great human being to sit down and have dinner with. If you ever have the opportunity, don't pass that up. But Shawn, I do appreciate your time, and everybody, I also appreciate your time for joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Bye-bye.